Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Wyletta Gamble-Lomax. I am currently an assistant professor of elementary education at Coppin State University in Baltimore, Maryland. And today I just wanted to take some time to share my talk with you. There is no wizard, the yellow brick road, and culturally responsive teaching. Oh, this is me when I was in probably mid elementary school. So probably second to third grade. And I'm sharing these photos because this is about the time in my life when I was introduced to culture responsive teaching. Now, of course, back then I did not know what that meant. I had never heard of that term. I don't even think that term existed at the time, but I was introduced to culture responsive teaching in third grade by Miss Williams. She was my third grade teacher. And my best friend, Kendall, and I at the time, we had a Black History program at our church, and we sang with the choir, Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is the Negro National Anthem. Miss Williams was in attendance. She witnessed this. And so we were so excited because, when kids see their teacher outside of school, it's like seeing a shooting star. It's just amazing. And we got back to school the following week. She pulled me and Kendall to the side, and we were two of maybe three Black children in this gifted class. So I was bused to a school that was not in my neighborhood, and I was a part of the gifted program, and so they had a gifted class. So everybody in that class was gifted, and I was one of about three Black students. And she told Kendall and I that we were going to lead our class in the song. We were going to stand in front of the class. We were going to lead them in the song because she knew that we knew this song. And I have to tell you, the experience of standing in front of the class with my friend, leading the rest of the students in this song, I mean, this is how it made me feel. I felt so wonderful. And I remember this experience so many years later because it made me feel important. It made me feel valued. It showed me that my teacher was able to look at my lived experience outside of the classroom and bring it into the classroom. And not only that, she empowered me to teach my peers about something that was culturally relevant and culturally personal for me, right? And it was a big deal. So when we talk about what it means to be culturally relevant, what are we talking about? What are we talking about when we talk about culturally responsive? What does that mean? Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings is like the founder of culturally relevant pedagogy, and she kind of focuses in on three areas when we think about what it means to be culturally relevant. The first one is student learning, realizing that all students can learn, all students are capable of learning. So let's focus on making sure that they are learning. The second thing is teaching our students to develop cultural competence. And what that means is having them recognize the assets that they bring into the classroom from their own culture, their own community, their own families, while at the same time becoming fluent in another culture or even more than one, right? So if I'm an African American girl, I'm in that gifted classroom and Miss Williams says stand up and sing this song. That is an example of that. She empowered me to understand the assets that I brought into the classroom. And at the same time, my Jewish peer, we have the opportunity to learn more about his culture, right? So that's an example of that. And the final piece is socio-political consciousness. And basically, it is an opportunity for teachers to bridge that gap and say the reason we are learning about the civil rights movement in 2020 is because it is still relevant to today. And then you start to make those connections. It is important that students understand what we're learning in a classroom goes beyond the classroom, goes beyond the school, and it finds its way in our communities, in our country, in our world. So back to Miss Williams when I was in third grade. Around that time, The Wizard of Oz was one of my favorite movies. So if you're not familiar with this movie, it's a classic film. It's been remade, but it's a film where there's a main character, Dorothy, and she's from Kansas. The movie starts off in black and white. She gets into something with her Auntie M, and There's a tornado. She bumps her head. Her and her dog Toto, when they wake up, they are in Oz. And now it's no longer black and white. It's a beautiful, colorful place. And she's informed that if she wants to get home, she has to go see the Wizard of Oz. And she has to travel down the yellow brick road. So as her and Toto are traveling down the yellow brick road, they encounter the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, and the Lion. And they all realize there are things that they want and need in this life, so they all want to go visit the Wizard of Oz. So anyway, this is one of my favorite movies. I used to stay up late when it would come on because there was no DVRing back then, right? So back then, my mom would let me stay up, watch the movie, and as I was preparing for this talk, I thought about how there are really important elements of that film that connect to what it means to be culturally responsive. And I wanted to share those based on the characteristics of the main characters. So the first character is Tin Man, and Tin Man, he needed a heart. That's what he wanted. He didn't have a heart, and he desired that. So he went on the journey to Oz. I mean, to the wizard to get a heart. So for us, how do we connect this concept of heart to being culturally relevant? So scholar Pedro Noguera shares that African American students tend to be relational learners. And what does that mean? It's about the relationships that the teacher has with students, and students really embrace teachers who believe in them, who care about them, and also those teachers that incorporate active activities into learning other than just lecturing them and having them sit, but really looking at how do they engage most and incorporating that. This is not new. This is not something that is innovative, but unfortunately people do not apply it. So it's problematic that it's not being applied. And so when we think about the hard work that we have to do to be culturally responsive, what does that mean practically? And for me, first of all, you need to build relationships with students. A way of doing this is having free journal writing. So you have a journal. This journal is not scored, it's not graded. You're not looking at their grammar, their punctuation. It's just an opportunity for students to share what they need to share. And you'll learn a lot about them. You can write back to them in the journals, but you will build relationships with students through, especially those students who don't want to share orally as often as others. They have this opportunity. Now, for those students who like to share orally, you can have something like a daily circle time where you are giving students the opportunity to share on different topics. And again, you're learning things about them. You can also share about yourself during this time. So students can say, oh, wow, we both like baseball. I didn't know Dr. G liked baseball. The next thing is you want to build relationships with families. We cannot authentically build relationships with students without building relationships with families. And of course, we know that's going to look different for every family, but you want to at least do that. You want to have some sort of meaningful relationship with families, right? So one way of doing this is sending home a survey, maybe towards the beginning of the year, using language that is appropriate. So putting something like families or guardians and not necessarily parents or mom and dad, because we know there are different family structures. But this gives you an opportunity to learn some things about the family, to learn some things about the student and their background, their culture, traditions, things like that. Also, another way to build relationships with families is bringing in like family or community members as experts. So if I know that Tyrone's grandma makes a mean sweet potato pie and I am teaching about sequencing, first, second, next, finally, I will have her come in and share this recipe because we know that a recipe is all about sequencing, and teach how to make this sweet potato pie. So now I've built this meaningful relationship. I've shown that Tyrone's grandmother is an expert. She is an important member of the community with this skill that she has, right? Also, you have to show students that you care. Now, I know that this is not like brand new news or anything, but there are a lot of teachers that do not care. There are a lot of teachers that do not care about students. They're kind of just there, they're over it. And we don't need any more teachers like that. We need teachers that actually care about students. So you want to be aware of what your students are interested in. You want to be aware of what activities they are engaged in inside and outside of the school environment. And you also want to be aware of their family traditions and beliefs and think about ways which you can infuse those into the classroom. Like when it's winter holiday, if you only talk about Christmas, like who are you eliminating from the conversation? So being mindful of those sorts of things. And then finally, do the hard heart work. This is absolutely the most important component here when we think about practical application for this, because we first of all have to examine our own biases and prejudices. If I know that every time I see a Latino last name, Gonzalez, Hernandez, if I automatically go to something that has a deficit view, for example, this child's not going to be able to speak English, this is going to be a struggle, it's going to be a problem. Why does my mind go there? That's a problem. And so we have to be able to be upfront and be honest and examine our own biases and prejudices. And a way to really tackle them is also intentionally engaging in boundary crossing experiences. So, for example, go to communities, go to spaces where you wouldn't typically go. Go sit in a black barbershop and engage with the people there. Go to the Catholic Mass and engage with people there. And it breaks down all these myths and stereotypes that you have in your head about people. And so you want to start to be intentional about engaging with people who are not, who don't have the same cultural background as you, who do not look like you, who do not speak the same language, right? So those sorts of things. Now, the next character is the Scarecrow, and the Scarecrow, he needed a brain. So he joined the journey on the Yellow Brick Road as well. When we think about this brain work, Christine Sleeter shares that as teachers, if we plan and teach challenging and interesting curriculum, and while we're doing so, we provide the students with the support that they need, that they are going to excel. They're going to rise to the occasion. And so, how do we do that? How do we do this brain work that is so important? Well, for me, you start with research and scholars who focus on these areas. Now, we're talking about culturally responsive teaching, but we have culturally responsive teaching, reality pedagogy, abolitionist teaching, culturally sustaining pedagogies, and the list goes on. But you look at those scholars who are engaged in this important and critical work, and you begin to look at this for yourself and say, okay, what can I apply from this theory, from what the scholar is sharing? How can I apply that to my own classroom or my own school? Also, you want to voluntarily engage in professional developments that are not mandated by your school, they're not mandated by the district, but these are things that you are interested in because you know that it's going to be beneficial to your students. Another piece is infusing these approaches in your planning, your instruction, and your assessment when you are thinking about student learning. Again, remember that's one of the most important components, student learning. So think about music, art, movement. Think about that student that you know he's an amazing artist. How can you use his artwork as a form of assessment for something that you are doing in your class? It gives the student the opportunity to shine, and you begin to learn that as an educator, there are other ways to assess students. It doesn't just have to be pen, paper, tests, right? Zaretta Hammond, who's the author of Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain, she shares, 3 tips on being more culturally responsive across content areas. The first one is to gamify it. And what she means by gamify it is that games oftentimes include these cultural tools that students are familiar with, like repetition, making connections, and solving puzzles. So you want to try to include games when you can. The second thing is to make it social. And making it social is all about having students be collaborative, having them work together. The third and final thing that she shares is storify it. And this is connected to, the oral tradition from many cultures and the tradition of storytelling. So including these elements across all content areas, math, science, social studies, reading, it's ways to be more culturally responsive. So this is the work that we have to put in. The lion is the next character. And if you don't remember the lion, he was a cowardly lion and he needed courage. So when we think about courage, Jeff Andre Duncan, he's an urban education scholar, and he shared that the day after Columbine, people weren't saying, okay, let's just go back to the books. They didn't ignore that traumatic situation that occurred. But every day, unfortunately, in these urban communities, it's just like, okay, you deal with trauma all the time. So what? Let's just keep pushing and go through this curriculum. And he said that it's insane to do that, but people are doing it because they don't consider that urban schools are failing. Because if something was failing, you would do something drastically different. And pretty much he sums it up with saying that schools are doing exactly what they are supposed to do. They're preparing young people for their proper station in life. And if you feel that somebody's proper station is to stay where they are, impoverished and things like that, then you're doing exactly what you're supposed to do. So when we think about being courageous, it is about going against the grain. It is about doing the opposite of what, Jeff, Andre, Duncan was sharing that schools are supposed to do. We're preparing students for their proper station in life. We're just going to keep pushing with the curriculum. No, you have to pause. You have to consider your students and think about what's best for them. So practical application for this is, first of all, commit to being culturally responsive. And secondly, be consistent in being culturally responsive, right? It's very easy for somebody to, you saw all the names that I shared, reality pedagogy, abolitionist teaching. We jump onto things and they're popular and we put them in our mission and our vision, but we don't commit to them and we are not consistent in really infusing it in the work that we do. So those are the first two things. Next, if you are in a school, if you have to take the lead, then take the lead and say, I'm going to be the culturally responsive guru up in the school. Come to me. I'm the person. Share this information with your grade level teammates and your colleagues. Partner with your school administrators to infuse these practices in the school. And also volunteer to lead a session during your professional development days or during your staff meetings. Whatever you can do, if you have to take the lead because nobody else is doing it, then do it. Go against the grain. Be the one that says, I'm not doing what everybody else does. I'm going to do what's best for my students. Now, finally, there's Dorothy. She's the main character, and Dorothy just wants to get home. So when we think about home, what does that have to do with being a culturally responsive educator? Miss Rita Pearson, who, if you've never seen her talk, Every Kid Needs a Champion, her TED Talk, you should go watch it. It's one of the most popular and most watched TED Talks ever. But she shared teaching and learning should bring joy. It's like very simple. When we talk about creating a learning environment that is like home, what does that mean? It means students need to be comfortable in their learning environment. The reason you go to somebody's house and you visit them, and what do people say? Make yourself at home. We feel comfortable there. We're not tense, we're not nervous, we're comfortable. It's a space that we know we're welcome. We know that we're appreciated there, and so we feel comfortable. Also, you create this environment by letting students know that they play a role in the structure and the organization of the classroom. So, for example, they help you create those classroom rules. You don't just come up with them yourself. They are a part of that process. You also may have flexible seating. So, Wyletta, today she wants to sit with the group, but tomorrow she doesn't because she knows that it's best that she goes over here in the corner and works alone. So think about those sorts of things when we're creating that learning environment. Also, what images are presented in the classroom? What posters are hanging up? What books are in the classroom? What videos do we watch? Um, you want to show love and appreciation for your students. Yes, I said love. Greet them in the morning. Say goodbye to them in the afternoon. And also just check in about students' lives. If I come to you, Mr. Brown, I have this softball tournament this weekend. The first thing you should ask me about on Monday morning is how that softball tournament went, because you're checking in about my life. You care about me. You remembered something that was important to me that I shared with you. It's those things that make children want to come back. They know that you care about them. They know that you appreciate them. And that's important. So, of all these things, our heart, brain, courage, and home, is one more thing I want to share. One final thing that I want to share. This can be a lot. This can be a whole lot. But the reality is, it's up to us because there is no wizard. This one talk is not going to solve the problem. And if you've never seen the film, towards the end, when they get to the wizard, they realize it's just a man behind the curtain, that he can't fix their problems. He empowers them to go and fix their own problems themselves. So there is no wizard. This whole becoming culturally relevant and culturally responsive is a process. And so we want to continuously embrace the process and do the best that we can for our students. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'm right here with you as we become culturally responsive.